The talk today is just about zirconia, and obviously we know zirconia, we probably all use it in this room, but I've found over the years that very few people truly understand zirconia. And what I'm going to focus on basically today is on the restorative aspect of it. We got a good, kind of overlay of what zirconia is from an implant standpoint yesterday. Dr. Maldovan talked a lot about this, and I thought the talk was extremely good, but she focused basically on doing ceramic implants. I'm going to talk more about the crown aspect of it, the crown and bridge. Okay, just so you all know, I've been a part of this organization for almost 20 years now. All right, I haven't been a member that long, but I first got involved in it in 2004 because I went through my own diagnosis of mercury poisoning, and I didn't know about it. I'm 4 years out of school basically at that point in time. Thought I was going to die because I didn't know what was wrong with me, and that's what kind of led me down this road. All right. Part of that time I've actually spent working in conjunction with Spear Center, which took me to Gordon, all right? And Gordon's kind of like this, if you talk to the dentists that are my age and older, they all know who he is. If you talk to dentists that are younger than I am, they have no clue who he is, all right? I've been involved in that organization since 2010, and the nice thing about it is that I have an ear because Rella buys into this stuff, and most of what I'm going to show, or a lot of what I'm going to show you anyway, has to do more with what Rella says than what Gordon says, okay? Because she's been studying zirconia longer than anybody else out there, all right? She's been heavily involved with the testing of monolithic zirconia in particular, which is, again, what I'm going to focus on, longer than anybody else out there. So I'm going to give you some data based on that, okay? Because I want everybody to know kind of the ups and downs of this material, because there are a lot of pitfalls, and a lot of times when you go and you put on a lab slip or you mill something in your lab or in your own office, you say make zirconia crown A2. All right, you don't necessarily know what you're getting back. All right, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Okay, let's clear the air right now. All right, obviously, I think it's been made perfectly clear over the past 2 days that zirconium is not zirconia. All right, one is a metal, one is not. If you see zirconium, all right, we know that zirconium is a rare earth metal, and it's used in a lot of different products that are out there, right? But it is not the zirconia that we use in dental care, all right? This is zirconium in nature. It is a rare earth mineral predominantly found in South Africa and other parts of the world, and it is used for, basically its high thermal tolerances, all right? We see it there on the periodic table. All right, but its history is, kind of a little bit unknown. So we're going to dive into that just a little bit here today. Okay, it's used in everyday life in chemistry, or because it has chemical forms and stabilities that are, very uncommon, and they can take heat. It is a very dense material, so it also has a very high strength. But we do things, around zirconia every day and don't even know it. All right. We first saw it in our industry, not in industry, but in our lives back in the 50s. They started using it medically back in 1969 for prosthetic joints, and then it was brought into dentistry in the mid-1970s. Okay, these are just a few of the products that will, that utilize zirconia, or zirconium, I should say, as part of the process. Or zirconium and zirconia, I should say. Obviously, in dentistry, this is what we use it for. All right, predominantly crown and bridge and dental implants. All right, the material itself has been well researched. All right, there is no escaping the fact that it is an extremely biocompatible material. All right, that has been studied almost ad nauseum at this point in time. There is no reason why anybody should think that this stuff is not good for the human body, all right? They have a whole bunch of doctors that have been around this organization for a long time in this room. They've used it. They have it in their own bodies. They will tell you, yes, it is a very, very good material to use if you want something that's biocompatible with the human biology, okay? Why is it important to understand the material, all right? Why? Simply put, it's become kind of the new gold standard within dentistry, all right? The strength is there. It has the strength either equal to or superior to gold in a lot of situations, but it has the biocompatibility that metals don't have. All right? To give you an idea, this data is actually from Glidewell. This was just sent to me by their head of laboratories. That's the nice thing about having a little bit of a relationship with Glidewell. They are the biggest laboratory in the entire world, so it kind of gives you a gauge as to what they're doing. This was their crown manufacturing process as of last month, right? 84% of the crowns that they're throwing out are in Bruxer, either aesthetic Bruxer, okay, or regular full-strength Bruxer, and we'll go into that here in a few minutes. All right, Emax was about 7%. Obsidian, which is their version of lithium silicate, is 6%. Then you have the other two materials out there as well. So believe it or not, cast gold is still part of the equation in some situations. Okay? So let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into zirconia. Let's just talk about the process and where we're getting it. All right? So how do we take it from that powder that's up there and turn it into the crown material that we use every day? Okay? The material itself is actually made from zircon sand. All right? They pull this stuff out of the ground in various locations around the world. Basically, it's usually mixed with other materials and other minerals, and they have to be able to obviously sift it out and be able to turn it into the zirconia dioxide that we use in our materials. Okay? But the zircon sands, there's a map of kind of where we're getting it from. A lot of it's coming from Australia. All right? There is some from other parts of the world, but the vast majority is coming from Australia. All right? All right, so basically, there's your breakdown of where it is coming from. All right, so Australia and South Africa make up the vast majority of it. All right, the refinement process. Okay, basically they transport this stuff to China. All right, believe it or not, simply because of the fact that China has lower environmental laws and it allows them to take this stuff because the process of cleaning up is very dirty. So go figure. They send it to China because they're the only place basically that will allow them to clean it up and get all the other crap out of it because it's hazardous for the environment to do it. Okay? After they get done, all right, with this zircon sand and go through that process, they have the basic zirconia powder. All right? All right, so let's talk about this a little bit. Okay? People have asked this question to me before, all right? They say, zirconia, wait a minute, isn't zirconia radioactive? All right? That's actually true. It is slightly radioactive. About like anything else in the world, it does have a 3% radioactive isotope in it, okay? The scientific community considers that to be negligible, but if somebody says, isn't it radioactive? Yes, the answer is yes, it is, okay? Okay. Once they have the zirconia powder ready, they basically put it on a freighter, all right, and they ship it off to Japan, all right? Once it gets to Japan, they unload it, and they go through the manufacturing process. This is Toso, okay? This is their nano complex. They make 82% of the world's dental zirconia, all right? Yeah, it's all mostly coming out of Japan, believe it or not, all right? They are the pioneers in this particular field. They know more about it than anybody else. They've done it longer than anybody else. This is where they add yttrium, okay, or yttria oxide, to the process to be able to create the dental blanks that either we use in office or that they use in the laboratories to mill out the crowns that we give to our patients. Okay, and here's a couple of obviously visual examples. There's the powder on the left that comes straight from Toso. All right. A lot of the manufacturers, either from CAD/CAM in office, you can see the katana block there, the dental implants, as well as the blanks for the crowns that you get at the laboratory. Okay, so let's go into dental products a little bit more. All right, and again, I told you I was going to focus more on the crown and bridge aspect of this today. All right, in dentistry now, we will traditionally use one of those two forms of zirconia. Okay. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. We have crowns, which is PFZ, all right, porcelain fused zirconia, all right, and then we have monolithic zirconia. Obviously, the implants are on the other side of the equation. All right, for the crowns, all right, again, those are the two types, all right. We have PFZ, and I don't know if a lot of our younger dentists won't even remember what PFZ is in a lot of situations. Basically, PFZ is like a coping of zirconia that has regular feldspathic porcelain stacked over the top of it, or lithium disilicate. You can put that on it too. Very common back when I was a young dentist. You know, we went from learning PFMs in dental school to doing PFZ because it was more biocompatible. This was in the early days. There was a product called Lava that was made by 3M up in my neck of the woods because I live in Minnesota. They kind of started to pioneer this, and then they figured out, wait a minute here, we have some challenges with this stuff, all right, both from a bonding standpoint as well as a durability standpoint, all right. Another quick fact or fiction, all right, zirconia is an ugly material. Well, I think we can all agree that monolithic zirconia can be very ugly, all right? We know when we put it in a patient's mouth, seldom does it actually mimic the natural look of a tooth, all right? That is the one challenge, I think, with monolithic zirconia that I hear other doctors say more than anything else they dislike, all right? They don't like the way it looks. It's not an aesthetic restoration, all right? And they've known about this for a long time, all right? Obviously, as a restorative material, it's not as aesthetic as you want it, but there are some ways to basically go in and characterize that. Obviously, staining glaze is one of those, all right? So because it was such an ugly material that we all started out with, they started looking at ways of how can we make this stuff look prettier, okay? How can we make it look more translucent, more lifelike, more like a natural tooth? And what they started to do is play around with the yttria concentrations in the material itself, all right? Basically, when we talk about zirconia, all right, what we want is the tetragonal form, or yeah, you can say tetragonal. Basically, that is what you will find with your 3Y zirconias, all right? Standard terms, Bruxer, Argent ST, those are the two big ones that are out in the market right now, all right? When you add more yttria, you take it to more of a cubic zirconia type of form, all right? And if anybody's gone into a jewelry store and thought, I'm going to buy a cheap diamond, obviously, guys, don't admit it if you've done it, all right? You know that it looks very much like a diamond. It's a synthetic diamond, basically, all right? But you can chemically alter the same material that you use for crowns to be able to make it more and more glass-looking by increasing the yttria oxide content which is in that material, okay? So when they started playing with this stuff, and Glidewell was kind of they were the kind of the pioneer in all this stuff, they started realizing, oh, wait a minute here, we can make this stuff look really, really, really pretty just by adding more yttria, all right? But they also know now that there's a downside to adding that yttria, all right? In the market right now, we traditionally have three different types, or three accessible types of zirconia. We have 3Y molar weight, we have 4Y molar weight, and then we have 5Y molar weight, all right? With each number increase, you're getting a higher concentration of yttria oxide that's added to these materials, all right? So it's going to make it more and more and more realistic the more, again, you put in of that yttria oxide, all right? And we're not talking weight by percentage. We're talking about molar weight, okay? And there is a difference that's very, very challenging to try to understand, and I'm going to try to make sense out of it here in just a few slides anyway, okay? From a strength standpoint, all right, because that's a big consideration here. We got a lot of grinders, all right, in our society right now, especially after COVID. I don't know about you guys, but in my practice, I've seen people all of a sudden start tearing the heck out of their teeth just because of the fact they're so stressed, all right? And strength is a big consideration here. So there's kind of your just general idea between like the Bruxer full strength, which is the 3Y, the Bruxer aesthetic, which is 4Y, all right, and a standard lithium disilicate like Emax. There is a substantial strength difference, with Bruxer Classic or the Bruxer full strength being almost twice as strong as a standard Emax, okay? For most patients, you won't have to worry about this, all right? I put CEREC restorations on people for years, all right? And I still got crowns that look as good the day that I put them on as I do today, all right? It depends on the occlusion the patient has. So we have to be mindful of that with the patients, okay? Either way, it's all about strength in the situation, so you choose your material carefully, all right? Just wanted to show this to you guys real quickly here because there's a newer zirconia restoration that is about ready to hit the market, okay? This is more of a super 5Y type of restoration, all right? See if it wants to pull in there. This is something new. This is literally brand new. You might not have even heard of this right now. This material is called Radiant. It's actually coming out of Glidewell Laboratories very soon. It is a 5.5 to 5.8 molar weight zirconia, all right? And years ago, Bruxer had a material called Bruxer Anterior, all right, which was a 5Y zirconia as well, that broke constantly. So people were terrified of using it, all right? And they took it off the market because it wasn't strong enough, all right? This material is actually revolutionary because it's got 780 megapascals of strength to it. That's flexural strength. The old Bruxer Anterior had only about 580 to 600. So they've reformulated it to create this, but they've also increased the molar weight, okay? Obviously, like I said earlier, you increase molar weight of yttria and it makes it look prettier, okay? This is one of their ads. I tried to beg them for some new material, but not many people have been told about this stuff. All right, they just released it 2 weeks ago to the public. All right, but it is. You can do all these different things with this particular material, and at $129 to $149 per unit, from a cost standpoint, you can make some really pretty veneers for people, regardless of whether they're chairside or done by the lab using this particular material. Now, you can't use it chairside yet. All right, they're not releasing it yet for that, but I just put a set of these on a patient about a week ago, and they looked dynamite. All right, here is the try-in. All right, one's Emax. All right, one's a super radiant zirconia. All right, and this was for try-in purposes. They're not cemented in place. All right, this is actually my patient. Can you tell the difference between the one and the other? One zirconia, all right, that's almost 70% stronger than the other one, which is Emax. All right, so ironically, the patient chose the Emax because she thought it blended with her natural teeth better. All right, wasn't by choice. She was really kind of bummed about it, but she goes, I think these are a little bit darker, and she was an Asian lady that had a little bit of coffee stains. She loved her macchiatos and Starbucks and whatnot, what have you, so she kind of went with it, okay? Either way, that was a stain and glaze case. There's another way of being able to stain zirconia, which you guys can ask your labs about. Some of you might know about this already, but it's not all about stain and glaze like it was with feldspathic porcelain years ago. All right? They actually have infiltration shading techniques now that some of the laboratories will do. Some have become very good with it, all right? And what that is basically like the old shrinky-dinks. If anybody was a kid and they used to paint the shrinky-dinks and put them in the oven to shrink them, it would actually pull the color into the plastic when you did it, okay? The same thing goes with zirconia, because I don't know about you guys, the biggest frustration I get with the zirconia restoration, which comes back, lab's done a great job with staining glaze, but then I've got to adjust it for a bite. And then what I'll end up doing is rubbing off part of the stain and glaze. And it's infuriating because then it's like, okay, I just ruined this thing. Okay, it looked beautiful and now it looks like crap because I had to adjust it for bite. And part of me wants to call the lab up and say, what the hell are you doing? You guys screwed this up. You didn't check it for bite. But at the same time, they can't physically recreate the movements of the mouth. Infiltration staining is another way of being able to do this. It's more like the shrinky-dinks when we were kids. It actually incorporates the stain before it goes through the sintering process. All right? What do you guys think of that? From a standpoint of shading, and granted the patient's got kind of dark teeth in that situation, that was all done with infiltration staining. They painted either the outside of the crown or the inside of the crown with staining liquid, then they cooked it. All right? And it actually baked the stain into it. So that way if you have to adjust it, it doesn't rub the stain and glaze off, all right, at all. All right? Now, I don't know if the video will play here. This is my buddy Jed Archibald out in Utah. I don't know if it'll play this or not. It did not. All right? No, it doesn't want to do it. All right, she must have locked it down when they did the presentation. They uploaded it. Either way, you guys kind of got an indication with that picture as to what they do. They try to affect stain by baking it in rather than just painting it on the outside. So it's not necessarily color by numbers on the outside and then glazing it and putting it into the oven. It's more baking it before it goes through the sintering process, before it hardens up to that final state. So they get it in the green state. Okay? Multi-layer zirconias. All right? This is also an up-and-coming thing within our dentistry. And what I mean by multi-layer, this particular product, Zircad Prime. All right, Zircad Prime is actually a block, all right, that has multiple layers of different types of zirconias in it. There's a 3Y, there's a 4Y, and there's a 5Y that's built into it. So like if anybody uses CEREC, they used to have, or they still have the Trilux blocks, all right, that are out there. Basically, it's kind of like that where it's gradiated, so that way when they place it in the block accordingly, and then when it comes out, it has better translucency as it moves towards the incisal edge. Right? They still might have to stain and glaze it, all right, but you have that improved translucency and natural look while still having the strength down low, all right? So this material is actually really, really kind of nice. I've used it in a couple cases, but it still does have its shortfalls. I've had several of these in bridges that have chipped around the incisal edges or the occlusal cusps simply because of the fact they are 5Y zirconia, all right? All right, another quick fact or fiction here. Zirconia is too hard and will wear the opposing teeth. Well, that depends on a couple of different aspects, all right? Zirconia dioxide in the 3Y form has a wear rate fairly similar to natural enamel, all right? It's not perfect, but it is similar, all right? And again, we're in the tetragonal stage, Remember what I said earlier about how when you add that yttria, it takes it more towards the cubic stage because it adds translucency. It's more like a glass ceramic when you add the yttria. So it's going to wear the opposing dentition a lot more aggressively the more you add yttria into the equation. All right? So if you're getting a 4Y to a 5Y, you're going to have way more wear to the dentition. All right? And why is that important? Well, obviously, laboratories, if you ask them for a 3Y zirconia, in some situations, they don't even know what you're talking about. Your lab techs just don't know. All right? So it's important that we as doctors indicate to the laboratory, this is what I'm looking for. All right? And I can tell you that, personally, there's a lot of confusion out there, and a lot of times the laboratories just don't know. Their techs are not educated. And that's why we as doctors need to know about this stuff. All right? But anyway, going into this, I kind of got this around about a month ago. This is actually a crown that came in for one of my associate doctors. And she looked at this and she goes, oh my God, what did they just give me? All right, and if you look at this, it says Y203, 6.1 to 8.2. Well, if you guys remember what I just said, all right, she panicked. She freaked. She's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to wear the patient's teeth down opposing this crown. All right, what this is, all right, is material composition percentage. All right, they don't ever on these forms, these little addend ceram certificates that a lot of labs will send with the crowns, they won't say 3Y or 4Y or 5Y. All right, they will say this percentage and that's it. That percentage is actually 4Y zirconia. All right, and I'll break this down more in a minute. All right, here's another one. All right, look at this one, 8.5 to 10% or yttria oxide. All right, again, it's by composition weight, not by molar weight. That's actually a 5Y zirconia. Okay, but yeah, it will freak you out sometimes when you see this, and there's this big confusion with the laboratories again because we don't know exactly what's going on. If you know about yttria, you look at that and go, oh my gosh, that's really going to wear down the opposing dentition. And it's going to, but not as much as what you might think. Because I look at this and first time I saw it, I'm like, 10Y, oh my God. That's really bad. It's going to be really brittle on top of it, okay? So here's the $1 million slide, okay? That's kind of your breakdown, all right? When you look at these addend ceram little stickers that they send with, all right, that is your breakdown right there of what constitutes what molar weight. All right, so 3Y molar yttria is basically equivalent to 5.35% compositional weight, okay? 4Y is roughly 6.95%, 5Y is 9.35% or above, all right? Trust me, I had to beg that one out of the labs. All right, that was a tough one to get, okay? Here's a good example. Rella actually gave me this slide. Okay, it kind of shows the wear against opposing teeth. All right, shows cast gold, standard enamel or polymer base. So that was a composite crown, and obviously you can see where it really worked over the gold or the polymer crown. Okay, that's at 13 years. So the opposing crowns, the opposing zirconia crowns, were there for 13 years, and that's how much wear they caused on all of these restorations. No joke. Okay, and obviously you can see enamel barely gets touched compared to the other restorations that are there. All right. Remember what I said earlier, adding the yttria comes at a cost, all right? Looks prettier. Now granted, I don't think those crowns are that pretty. I wouldn't probably put those in that patient's mouth. But it did wear down the opposing dentition pretty good as a result of it. Okay? Here's another one of the areas that I really want to focus on because this is critical as well. Because we as dentists directly affect how our restorations are going to hold up and we don't even know it. Okay? With adjusting, with 3Y zirconia, there's a phenomenon that occurs, all right, called transformation toughening. All right? Anytime you grind on a 3Y zirconia crown, all right, it's going to create micro cracks within the restoration. All right? But what happens with those cracks, I'm going to try to use my laser here. It's going to work. There we go. There's the crack, and what happens is the material itself, all right, basically transforms itself from being tetragonal to becoming this monoclinic type of zirconia, which is actually making it stronger. So this material, when it cracks, all right, from adjusting, it actually makes the restoration tougher than it was before when you sat it. All right, believe it or not. All right, so when you're holding your hand before you even tried it in the patient's mouth, if you go to adjust it and grind on it, you're going to create micro cracking on this material. All right, but it actually strengthens it. It does not weaken it. All right. Why is that important to know? Because this transformation toughening does not occur with 4Y or 5Y zirconia. All right, so how you adjust the restoration before you seat it is going to depend on how much damage you do to it before you cement it in the mouth. Okay, everybody follow me? Okay. How do you put it on? All right, that was one of the big problems that we had with some patients early on. We had a lot of crowns that debonded. All right, because they would tell us, like 3M, I'm up in 3M country, they told us, use this cement, just plop it on the crown, put it on the tooth, and everything will be fine and dandy. Well, we found out after a couple of years that that wasn't truly the case. Why? Because zirconia does not bond well to resin cements, all right? And over time, through different experimentation, they've been able to determine that we need to create some type of chemical coupling layer between the actual zirconia surface, all right, and the cement itself that we're using. And, you know, obviously at IAOMT, you know, there are a couple different ways to cement or bond zirconia. You can bond it. You can use resin cement. Used to not be able to do that. Trust me, when I started out using 3M Reliax, they told us, yeah, absolutely, these lava crowns will stay in place. And I had so many debond, it wasn't even funny, all right? But we weren't using the coupling layer back then, all right? So we'll use other materials like Z-Prime. That's a classic example. Bisco's Z-Prime is fantastic. It will prevent the crowns from coming off because it forms a chemical bond to the actual surface of the zirconia. All right. I like to use resin cement. All right. In most situations. Why? Because I don't like using resin-modified glass ionomer because, again, it is still glass ionomer. It is fluoride. All right. Even though you're light curing it in a lot of situations and light curing it will actually lock the fluoride into it, there still is a little bit of release to it, okay? So you're still going to get some of that fluoride. And a lot of patients that I see are just deathly afraid of anything fluoride, all right? So we'll use resin cement. Standard procedure with zirconia though, all right? Etch it, all right? Micro etch it. Hit it with aluminosilicate, all right? 50 micron, no more, all right? Scratch the heck out of the inside of this thing, all right? Using phosphoric etch or hydrofluoric etch will not work. You use that with ceramic or Emax. You don't use that here, all right? You mechanically micro etch the inside of the crown, all right? You can also go in and you can actually create a couple of little grooves on the inside of the crown to create a little bit of a mechanical lock. That's okay. I wouldn't try it with anything more than 3Y zirconia, all right? But you can do it, all right? Then come in with the Z-Prime to make sure you have that chemical coupling layer between the cement and the crown, and then pop it on. Because zirconia very seldom, or basically when you have a zirconia crown debond, it's very seldom the cement pulling away from the tooth. It's usually the tooth crown, or the crown itself pulling away from the cement. And the cement's still left on the top of the tooth, okay? I think about everybody in this room has probably seen that before, okay? So having that primer layer on the inside of the crown is critical, all right? Placement. All right, this is another consideration as well, simply because, you know, zirconia, because it's so popular now, even Glidewell themselves, they have their own milling chamber, all right? And this is one of the pitfalls of this, because when you're using anything CAD-CAM, you are victim to whatever milling products they're using, all right? With CEREC, you have, you know, multiple burrs. When I first started out using CEREC, it was still the red cam. We were spraying the teeth with powder, all right? And you had two burrs that spun around. You had a step burr that would potentially overmill the inside of the tooth and create too much of a cement gap, all right? Or you have the newer models that are way overcutting because the burrs are so big, like Glidewell's. Their claim to fame is that they have a post-centered block that we can cut chair side and just put on. We don't have to cook it, all right? Fantastic, but you create a huge cement gap in there, all right? So you're losing that intimate fit with the tooth, all right? And you'll lose mechanic and retention form out of this thing, resistance and retention form. And if you have a prep that's like this, there's no way that sucker's staying on. The cement gap is too big, all right? So be mindful of that. We have to prep the teeth accordingly, especially if we're doing chair side dentistry using any type of chairside milled material because your adhesive gap is going to be much bigger than it would be if you went to a laboratory, all right? The laboratory is cutting this stuff in the green state. It's much, much softer. They can use much smaller burrs to be able to hollow out the inside intaglio of that crown, all right? So you're gonna get a much more precise fit using the laboratory than you will using a chairside system at this point in time. And it doesn't matter the materials, it doesn't matter what you're using, whether it's zirconia, emax, glass ceramic, doesn't matter. It's the same way across the board, all right? But with zirconia, again, this is critical because if you have too much of that spacer gap, the chances of you having a debond are a lot higher, okay? All right, so just a couple takeaways with the material. You know, we talked about material choice. It all depends on the patient's occlusion, obviously. Adjusting, remember I talked a little bit about the 4Y and such, okay? Let me go and expand on that a little bit more. If you were to have a standard 4Y zirconia crown, all right, and you go and you don't like the occlusion on this thing and you start grinding the heck out of it, all right, you've created micro cracking on this tooth that is so bad on the inside that it weakens it by roughly 40%. All right, so all of a sudden instead of having, you know, 760 megapascal crown, all right, you've dropped that thing down to about 350 to 400, right? Not something you want to put in somebody's mouth who clenches or grinds. All right, it will break it apart. It's going to flex and break apart over time. All right, and you know, if you like redoing your own dentistry and charging the patients more, that's fantastic. That's one way to make money. All right, I just wouldn't do that personally. Okay, all right. So there are a lot of different considerations that can be made here. All right, 5Y zirconia, same thing. 5Y zirconia, if you're going to use it anywhere, bond it first. Get it on the tooth, clean it up, then adjust it. All right, because otherwise you will have it break within the course of about a year. All right, 2 if you're lucky. All right, but don't invest the money. If you want to pay for the same real estate twice, use 5Y zirconia. Otherwise, be very mindful of it. Okay, real quickly here, we're going to touch on some alternative materials. All right, again, we talked about how popular Bruxer in general is for Glybal laboratories. All right, I show this, and I swear, Glybal does not pay me a dime to show you guys this information, all right? I just wanted some quantitative data. They're the most, I would say, open about releasing the data to anybody, all right? So they're very kind to be able to provide me the data, but that's what they see in their laboratory. And from what who I've talked to, Rella in particular, she said it's pretty consistent across the industry now, all right? As an aside, Glybal just went to the point where they are now, 54% digital submission for their restorations, which means that we're scanning 54% of the crowns that we're sending in, which I kind of thought was ironic because if you send something to Glidewell, if you scan it chairside or you take an impression, doesn't matter because as soon as they get the impression, they're putting in a scanner and it's getting scanned anyway, all right? So it does make a little bit of a difference. You won't find, you know, too many laboratories now that are actually pouring up an impression model. I don't know, is any dental students, young dentists here, are you guys still pulling up your own models and such? I see no heads doing this. We're in the digital age. It's not going to go away. Scanners are here to stay. So, whoops, let me go back one slide here real quick, guys. I'm sorry. Come on. Okay, forget it. I lost it. This is your second most popular option on that chart, all right? Emax, all right? Obsidian is Glybal's brand name for it. But Emax, all right, you see a dramatic strength drop when you have Emax or lithium disilicate versus using some type of monolithic zirconia, all right? 360 to 500 megapascals flexural strength, all right? That's 2/3 of what a Bruxer aesthetic is going to be in this situation. Now, granted, all right, you can still bond it, you can still cement it, depending on what you want to do, and you can grind on it without having to worry about damaging it so much. So that's the one advantage that Emax has. It's also fairly pretty, all right? You can make an Emax crown look pretty good on the mouth, okay, or in the mouth. The downside to it, all right, again, it's just not as tough, all right? So, oh, come on. There you go. And obviously, material comparison, your standard blue block, Emax material. So, okay. So let's talk about the biocompatibility here a little bit, all right? We know that these materials do create very similar biocompatibility issues in the mouth, okay? In most situations, all right, this can be affected by what you put the crown on with, all right? The cement, all right? If you do not take the cement off, you do not remove it around the margins, and you don't have snug fitting margins and have open gaps because you have milled at chair side, all right, then this can become problematic for your patient and create some type of reaction at the gum line, right, or below the gum line, depending on how you prep the tooth. All right, it's really that simple. All right, so be mindful of that if you use an Emax. And granted, Emax you can cement or bond just like you can Zirconia. All right, you have to use the hydrofluoric etch on it and then silinate it rather than the primer. But you still have to be able to get a good fitting crown on the top of that thing, get the cement cleaned off to make sure you're maintaining that biocompatibility. All right, there's nothing wrong with lithium disilicate. I don't know, I actually have to go to, I'm hoping to take a side trip over to Liechtenstein when I'm over doing the STS course here in, in October, because that's where like 98% of the world's lithium disilicate comes from. In this tiny little country in the middle of Europe that nobody even knows about. So, all right, just real quickly about implants. I think we're running pretty close to being done on time here, so Nestor still got his thumb up. Quick little fact or fiction. Zirconia implants are too brittle and too fragile to use for implants. Well, we kind of all know that's pretty much bunk now, all right? Joe was telling me, Dr. Palmer was telling me just a little bit ago that he's got one in his mouth, and you said yours has been working great, yes?
15 years.
All right, 15 years right there, okay? So they work. The general dentistry establishment, it's not the status quo yet, all right? The Europeans are way ahead of us in this regard. Easily 10 to 15 years, we know that. Anybody in this room that does standard titanium implants right now should be looking at this if you are a biologic dentist, all right, and trying to learn as much as you can about it. And like I said, I'm not going to really go down that rabbit hole too far. That was discussed yesterday, all right, but the material itself is very similar in many ways to what we use for crowns, all right. They do add a little bit more of aluminum disilicate to it, all right, to toughen it just a little bit more, all right. But again, we're not having to worry about that increased amount of yttria, because if you had more yttria in it, all right, it will become brittle. We don't have to worry about that, okay? Obviously, with the implant options that we have available, we either have a one-piece or a two-piece, all right? Gives you more options as far as like what restorations you can put in the mouth. All right? Main difference that you see a lot of people gripe about is the fact that you have size differences, all right? Zirconia implants tend to be a little bit bigger than their titanium counterparts, so it is a little bit harder to basically make the final restoration, especially in a location like, say, the lower anterior, where the teeth are really, really close together. You don't have a lot of those situations, and you most certainly are not going to find a two-piece ceramic implant in most situations that will fit between lower incisors. It just does not happen. You need to go to a single piece or consider a Maryland bridge or some type of 3-unit fixed bridge in that situation. All right. List of your brands right out there. Zeramex is kind of in a weird situation. I use Zeramex for years. Now, is that what you have in your mouth, Joe? Is Zeramex?
It's a Z-Systems.
Z-Systems, okay. Zeramex is kind of floating right now. We used to work with Mike Foley. He was here from Emergenova. That company now has apparently folded. Most of the Zeramex product, if you want to get it, you have to go through Keystone Dental now. What's that? Well, the Nobel's got, yeah, if you didn't know, the Nobel Pearl is basically a Zeramex implant, all right? I think Nobel basically bought them out, didn't they? Yeah, because it's basically the exact same implant, all right? Probably it's more expensive, obviously, because it's Nobel. It says Nobel on it. You put the Nobel N and it makes it more expensive, all right? There are pros and cons, all right? Obviously, between the two, all right? And we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. I won't go down that rabbit hole either, okay? But things to consider with this is that, again, you will have a little bit of a learning curve with this, all right? Zirconia implants are more challenging than titanium implants are to place, all right, and then to restore. So make sure you guys get the experience. Make sure you do your homework on these things before you buy a system if you haven't done that already, all right? Because there are a lot of pitfalls that you can fall into with this stuff. And knowing the system before you actually buy it is kind of critical. I went down the Zeramex rabbit hole the first time when they had their P6 implant, and it was a bear to restore it. So hard. The XT is much better. The old P6 was, nightmare. Won't even go down there, or down that road. Either way, I found the big challenge with this material more than anything else is the labs. The labs don't know how to restore it, all right? There are very few, at least up in my neck of the woods, that had even heard the implant that I was using at the time. And they ended up having to have me buy the parts. They didn't know how to redo it or how to do it to begin with. They didn't know how to be able to put the crown on it and design it. I ended up having to spend my own time going into the laboratory and helping them get familiar with the system. So be ready to do that. There's not a lot of lab education regarding the particular product at this point in time. I will tell you this much. It is getting better, all right? But there is still kind of that unknown that exists out there for the lab techs when it comes down to this material. All right? So anyway, know the limitations, all right? The one limitation that I will bring up more than any other is that you need to be mindful of systems that utilize metal with zirconia at the same time, all right? Why? Because both materials have different compressive strengths to it. And when you take an implant, like say the Straumann Pure that's up here, you've got a nice titanium implant, and you're taking a nice metal screw, and you're going right down the center of it, and you're tightening it down. It's causing the stress of the material that are unlike, and you'll see a lot more fractures with these type of implant systems than you will see with like a pure zirconia. All right, whether it's from SDS, whether it's from Z Systems, whether it's from Ceramix, you will have better results with those if you do not use any type of system that has steel as part of it, or metal in general, I should say. Okay, so wrapping up, some final thoughts for you all. Okay. Because really this topic is something where if I wanted to really get into it, it would take me 2 to 3 hours to really give you the minutia. And hopefully I've given you just a little off the top. So which product to choose, all right? You want to think about the biomechanical properties that the patient's giving you when they come in prior to doing the restoration, all right? You want to think about the occlusal forces that are going on this thing, all right? And you want to think about where it is in the mouth. All right, if you got a second molar that's got very little vertical dimension and you know the patient's a grinder, then yes, 3Y zirconia, perfect. It doesn't matter if it looks like an ugly marble back there. All right, still looks better than gold in the back of their mouth. But back there, it will have minimal aesthetic effect, even though it's 3Y zirconia, but it's going to be tough. In the front of the mouth, I would never put 3Y zirconia, even if it was stained. All right, because it's just not pretty enough. And most patients, unless they've already got a roundhouse situation where they've got PFM crowns from one corner to the other, it's not going to look good if you put it in there. Even in those situations, it might not look good. So it just depends. All right, so be very mindful of these things when you decide what crowns to be able to put in a patient's mouth. All right, quick little chart of just some material comparisons as far as strengths and what they are. All right. I actually kind of think this is funny because the ceramic polymers, they barely have any strength, yet if you go to laboratory or you go to the events right now, like Dentsply Sirona World, I think is going on, what is it, in a week or two, somewhere like that up in Vegas. All right, they have this meeting every year, and their big push right now is Tessara, 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 Tessara. All right, thing I think is really funny about Tessara is that, you see that material called Celtra Duo? All right, Celtra Duo is known within the community of the scientists as Celtra Do-Over. All right, why? Because 37% of these things came off at 5 years. All right, 37%, more than a third of them. All right, and the reason I think Tessara, their push for Tessara is a little bit comical is because if you go today and you do a search for an MSDS or an SDS sheet for Tessara, guess what it says at the top of the sheet? Celtra Duo. All right, so it's basically the exact same material. Otherwise, they would have to create a new SDS for it. All right, so you've got a wolf in sheep's clothing, basically. So be mindful of that material. And I say that with respect to Dentsply. They make a lot of good products, but most people don't know that. They think it's brand new, and it literally is on the same SDS sheet if you look. Okay, quick little chart of zirconias by strength as far as like the 5Y Plush, which is that radiant material I showed you earlier, as well as the other materials that are around there. That's more for reference. If you guys go online, the slides are available for you to be able to look at. Okay? So let's just talk about quick little final takeaways from all this. All right? Biomechanics will dictate strength requirements, location of the mouth, like I said earlier, and then also the final cement. We touched on that just a little bit. All right? But that could potentially affect your aesthetics as well. Okay? And I gave you all the formulations. Those are also online, so if you didn't take a picture of it, the slides are downloadable. All right, but as far as biocompatibility, all right, you really, as long as you stick to materials like a monolithic, all right, or a PFZ, or an Emax, lithium disilicate, or lithium silicate, again, you're going to have extremely biocompatible materials, regardless of whether you're bonding onto a natural tooth, onto a ceramic implant, even onto a titanium implant if you're going that route. All right, the material is there. All right, it has come of age. Is it perfect? No. We know that because one of the minor shortfalls with zirconia is it's like a rock. It's very, very hard. All right, I want you to think about when you bite on something that's extremely hard. All right, the rest of the teeth give. All right, they have a PDL underneath them that acts as a shock absorber. Those crowns don't give. All right, and they pound on the opposing dentition, not from a flexural and wear standpoint. All right, but they beat up the opposing PDL. All right, and that is something that this kind of the research is ongoing. Rella is actually looking into this right now because they're starting to see some patients that are developing some minor issues when they start to have occlusal changes after having these crowns placed and they've been tracked. All right, that's a cool thing about her research. She just tracks these people over and over and over. Like I said, they're in year 14 of their zirconia study, and we're just starting to get some new things come to light in that study. So I hope I've taught you a little bit about just knowing the difference between the materials. All right, and knowing what to ask for and knowing the pitfalls about this stuff. Because I didn't know any of it when I first went down this rabbit hole myself a few years ago. All right, work with your lab techs because, like I said, in a lot of situations, they don't know what they're giving you either. They hear zirconia, they think that's what their bosses give them, and they're just shoving it out. But if you want a 3Y zirconia and you don't properly communicate to them that, they will more than likely be giving you a 4Y zirconia product back. The vast majority of the crowns that do come back from the laboratories now are 4Y zirconia, okay? And obviously the care and adjustment during placement and knowing how to place them correctly will be what determines long-term whether or not that sucker stays on there and whether they don't beat the crap out of it, okay? All right, that's it, gang. Thanks for hanging around. So hope to see you all in March at the next meeting.